So today, we are going to be going over all the books I read in 2023 and, kind of ranking them in almost sort of like a tournament style to see which one is the favorite or the best book of the year. Now, pathetically, I did not read that much this year. I think I have only like 24 books in here, which is pretty bad. My excuse being that I was in school for the first half of 2023, and then over the summer I was pretty busy volunteering at a summer camp, so I didn't have the most time ever to read. But since I moved back home to Edmonton, I've been doing pretty good with the reading. So I'm hoping to, I don't know, double the amount of books next year. Maybe that's a bit ambitious, but hey, yeah. So anyways, a bit pathetic, but nonetheless, we are going to go through the 24 books that I read this year and see which one's the best. Alright, so first we're going to start on the top left here, and we have a battle between Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Hess's Steppenwolf. Now, this tournament match style thing that I'm using has like a character cap, which is why the full title isn't here. But yeah, okay. Now, I've read a few of Hess's works, and I really did like Siddhartha. I read that when I was quite young, and I really liked it. However, Steppenwolf didn't really resonate with me the same way. I found that it was glorifying hedonism a little bit too much for my liking. But I think he did a good job at portraying like the lonely, tortured, starving artist stereotype with the main character there. This one I read like pretty early on in 2023, so I don't remember too many of the details, but it wasn't my favorite. And then Stevenson, I read that recently, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I really liked it. So for this particular matchup is not that much of a difficult one for me, so clear winner there. Alright, now we're going to this one here. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip Dick versus Lafferty's Passmaster. Now, I almost DNF'd Passmaster. I heard really great things about Lafferty and particular Passmaster, but I really just didn't jive with it. The plot was just kind of jarring, jumping from one scene to the next. I feel like Lafferty could have made the book 3 times as long and like explained things better, and it would have made it more engaging. And it's hard to put Lafferty up against Philip Dick, who is like the best sci-fi writer of all time, arguably. So, yeah, again, clear winner here. Not that difficult for me. Next, we've got Karen King's What is Gnosticism versus Bram Stoker's Dracula. Now, I read Dracula this year, actually a reread, as a part of some sort of Substack experiment, where if you didn't know this, Dracula's written in a series of letters, which are dated throughout maybe like 8 or 9 months, and so somebody on Substack sends out the letters of Dracula as they happen, which is a really fun way to read it. And Dracula isn't my favorite novel, but it's not bad. I like it. And it's kind of difficult here putting it up against a nonfiction book, because Karen King's What is Gnosticism is all just about the histories of like early Christianity, which is interesting, but I'm kind of rating these in terms of enjoyment, and fiction is much more enjoyable than nonfiction. It's just easier to read. So again, I don't think this is too difficult for me to decide. Dracula takes that one. Next, this is an interesting one. So Wells' War of the Worlds, I read that maybe in early high school, and then I reread it this year. As far as sci-fi goes, it's not like a page-turner, but it is like a very classic sci-fi book, and it is enjoyable. And if you hadn't read it for the first time before, maybe it's more draws you in a bit better. However, yeah, Moby Dick I read. I started a book club this year, or actually I think we might have started in 2022 for a couple months. I don't remember. Maybe I started this year. Anyways, that was the first book we did as a part of this little book club I started with my friends, and it was a bit of a gauntlet. It was a test to see how committed my friends were to this book club, because a lot of them did not finish. But those who did really enjoyed it, and so did I. And so I think in this case, Melville's going to win over on Wells here. But I can't say that Melville-Wells battle would always go in favor of Melville. I think there's other of Wells's novels that perhaps would win over some of Melville's novels. But of course, Moby Dick being his magnus opus and a very large milestone in American literature, Moby Dick is going to take this one. All right, going up to the top right here, we've got Shakespeare's Measure for Measure versus George MacDonald's The Princess and the Goblin. Now, George MacDonald I got into because of C.S. Lewis. Apparently, C.S. Lewis has never written anything without quoting from MacDonald. He's MacDonald's biggest fan, basically. And so I really like and respect C.S. Lewis, and so, of course, I had to dive into MacDonald. And I've read another one of his books called Lilith, and it was super interesting, heavy symbolism, a bit obscure, I would say. I think a lot of the symbolism went over my head at the time. Maybe I should reread it in a couple years to see if I can glean anything new from it, but this one was fairly accessible. I think it's for kids, Princess and the Goblin. And it was good, pretty standard kids fairy tale stuff. I wasn't really, it wasn't a page turner for me, but it wasn't boring either. It was kind of just standard fare. And now Shakespeare, I read a bit in high school, like everybody else in North America, but I kind of didn't appreciate him back then, so I just recently got back into him. I read this year Measure for Measure, Winter's Tale, and Romeo and Juliet. And Measure for Measure, I think, was the best one I read of the three, and I quite enjoyed it. I think Shakespeare does a good job of putting people in weird situations and then seeing how they respond to that and, kind of work through or navigate through the situation. And he also puts a lot of funny puns and, like, in his comedies, he has lots of, like, sex jokes, which I think are hilarious because they're, like, hidden behind, like, flowery language. And so I really enjoyed reading Shakespeare as a older person, not being in high school. So I think in this case, Shakespeare is going to win out over MacDonald here. All right. Hoffman's The Nutcracker and the Golden Bowl, I believe, and then Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Now, I read Hoffman and the Nutcracker as a part of the Christmas box set, which I released a video on already, and I just wasn't hot on it. I had high hopes, and I was disappointed. And Shakespeare is Shakespeare, right? It's hard to put anyone up against Shakespeare on a good day. And Romeo and Juliet was a good read. I wasn't passionate about it. I wasn't, like, thinking about it before I went to bed, you know? I wasn't a page turner, but it was good. I liked it. And so I think in this case, Shakespeare wins out. All right. Next, we've got the great short works of Franz Kafka versus Shakespeare's A Winter's Tale. Now, I did enjoy Winter's Tale, I have to say. Again, another one of Shakespeare's comedies, but it wasn't as good as maybe Measure for Measure was. And Kafka, I had never read any Kafka before, and some of his earlier works I didn't get, but some of the other ones were really great, like In the Penal Colony and Metamorphosis, obviously, is his most famous. I feel like there's one other one in there I'm forgetting, but it was good too. And I would say Kafka, some of the short stories in that collection were definitely more page turners than A Winter's Tale. And so I do really like and respect Shakespeare, but I think I gotta give this one to Kafka. I did appreciate it a little more, just for its uniqueness, honestly. Next up, we've got Dickens' The Cricket on the Hearth and other short stories, as well as Golding's Lord of the Flies. Both very seminal works, very famous. This is a tough one. I don't really... They're both sort of 3-star reads for me. They're 3 out of 5. They're not like... I'm not passionate about either one. Now, this is very interesting, this juxtaposition here, Golding versus Dickens, because Lord of the Flies is sort of appealing to that pagan, natural side of man that's more barbaric and bestial, like surviving in the wilderness. Versus Dickens, you have this more civilized tone, where in The Cricket on the Hearth, he's sort of promoting these values of hearth and home, family, everyday life, and it's more quiet and respectable and civilized. And so I sort of feel the two poles of myself being pulled apart here in this little this battle between Golding and Dickens. It's So let's avoid all that deep philosophical quandary between the civilized and the barbaric, and let's just focus on which book I enjoyed more. I think in this case it has to be Lord of the Flies. I remember there were parts in there where I wanted to go to bed, but I was like, I gotta finish this chapter. Versus Dickens' Cricket on the Hearth was kind of a slow start, so I think Lord of the Flies wins out. Alright, that's the first round of everything. Now we're going into round 2. Alright, so in this case we've got Philip Dick's Solar Lottery, which I did really like, and then against Stevenson's Strange Case. Now, I already talked about the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but I haven't talked about Dick's Solar Lottery. Now, Solar Lottery is one of Philip Dick's earlier works, and the premise behind it is that there's this mechanism in society that sort of chooses who like the world president is, and it's random, so you never really know who it's going to pick or when it's going to pick. And there's sort of this like aspect of neo-feudalism where people sign oaths to like these rich bureaucrats. It's a really interesting book, and Philip Dick does a really good job of sort of weaving multiple storylines together and having multiple characters and developing those characters in relation to the plot, and so Dick is very readable. But in this case, I just loved The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So I think I'm going to give this one to Stevenson, not because of any failings on Philip Dick's part. I love him, and I love all his novels that I've read so far, but I just really like Stevenson. And part of the reason for that was the word choice and the language and the aesthetic that he built up around The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There's this sort of gloomy Victorian, like Gothic aesthetic, and I really was sucked into that. And I was like, by the end of the novel, I was like wishing I was a gentleman in Victorian England, you know? So I think this one's going to have to go to Stevenson. Alright, now we're on to Philip Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep versus O. Henry's The Gift of the Magi and Other Short Stories. Now, I was pleasantly surprised. O. Henry was the last book in the Christmas box set that I read, and I was, I kind of went into it with the attitude of, oh, let's just read this and get it over with. But I was pleasantly surprised, and I ended up buying, if you saw my last video, his complete works at a thrift store. And I spent $30 on it, you know, so that's a pretty big commitment. And so, O. Henry, it was great. But Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, I mean, I've already stated my love for Philip Dick. We read that with the book club, and so we got to like sort of dissect it a little more and talk about some of the issues and themes it brings up. And so I think this was going to be it's a tight one, okay? I like both of these books, but it's going to be a tight win by Philip Dick here. Next, we are on to Freud, the Psychopathology of Everyday Life versus Stoker's Dracula. Now, I got a lot out of this Freud book when I read it. This was early 2023. I just came back from the Christmas trip to Palm Springs last Christmas, and I'd found this for $4. It's a giant compilation of Freud for $4 under the coffee table books section. So they did Freud real dirty with that one, but it has all his major works in there, and Freud is dense. He has a lot of examples, which is great. I find that to be very helpful, but his ideas are not stated as clearly as I need to have them stated for me, because I am dumb. I'm like a 5-year-old, so I need people to tell me exactly what they mean. But so Freud is a bit dense. You can't just like blast through his stuff. You gotta take your time with it. But I did get a lot out of it. I have a book on my other channel, I have a video on my other channel about this book. So I did like it quite a bit. Stoker's Dracula, again, I already talked about that one. I like it, not my favorite. It's alright. So I think in this case, the non-fiction is actually going to win over the fiction, which is not something you should get used to. But in this case, I think I'll give this one to Freud. Alright, another non-fiction book here, Tim Keller's The Reason for God. And it's sort of like a apologetics for lay people. Introduction to Christianity for the non-Christian. He brought up a lot of good points in this book, a lot of things that I hadn't considered before. I enjoyed this read, but again, fiction versus non-fiction. It's a tough one for me, right? Usually fiction wins. I also have a video on my other channel about this one, so I suggest you go watch that. But yeah, I think it's hard to give that one away. So I think Melville will take that one. Now, Things Fall Apart. I read this one pretty fast. It's not too long of a book, and I read it quickly because I enjoyed it. I don't really read a lot of world literature. I usually stick to the Western canon, but this book was recommended to me, and so I saw it at the thrift store. I'm like, hey, why not? The world that it describes is so different from everything that I've read and known. And I think that was the reason I enjoyed it so much, because it was just like this lens into another world. It was a sad book though. Like, come on, it doesn't leave things nice and tied up with a bow, and kind of doesn't give you much closure. But I think I don't even know how you say this last name. Achebe. It's tough to put him up against Shakespeare, because I really enjoyed Measure for Measure. Now, if you were comparing this with Romeo and Juliet, that would be a very tough decision for me. But again, I really liked Measure for Measure. It was my favorite Shakespeare of the year, and so I think this one is going to go to the Bard. All right. I already talked about Romeo and Juliet, but I also did All Tomorrows with my book club. It was just a one-meeting thing. It was pretty quick. It isn't really like a conventional book. There's not really a lot of plot. It's sort of just like an and then, and so there isn't a lot of narrative, but it is very visionary as a sort of a theory, and it was interesting to read. I enjoyed it, but it was very concise. He didn't give any like lore or backstory to any of the different humanoid things that evolve or that are biomedically engineered. So I don't know. I liked it, but I wasn't like super passionate about it. So in this case, I think Shakespeare is going to take this one. All right, Grimm's Fairy Tales. So I read that again early 2023 when I was in Kelowna. Around the same time I was reading Kafka, actually. So these two were co-occurring in time, as well as on this tournament list. So makes it a bit easier for me to compare. Now, I did like Grimm's Fairy Tales, but I don't know, like, I feel like they're a bit more forgettable. Like, they're enjoyable, but they're a bit more forgettable. Whereas Kafka, I still think about In the Penal Colony and Metamorphosis. I still think about them every once in a while, you know? Whereas Grimm's Fairy Tales, I can't really remember the specifics of anything that happened in any one of them, although I did enjoy them. So I'm not trying to speak against Grimm here, but I think Kafka wins that one. All right, and the last of our second round here, Lord of the Flies versus Dick's The Divine Invasion. Now, this is interesting. Now, I didn't know when I read The Divine Invasion that it's actually the second book in a trilogy. And if I haven't read the other two books, Valis and The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. I haven't read either of those two yet, but I think they don't connect plot-wise, just thematically. So I don't think you have to read them in order. Again, I don't know that. I'm still looking for the first book. I think Valis is hard to find. Anyways, I liked it quite a bit. I think that trilogy, the Valis trilogy, of which this is a part, was Philip Dick's attempt at like fitting religion and Christianity into his sci-fi universe. And based on The Divine Invasion, he did a very good job. I really liked Divine Invasion. A lot of interesting ideas in the way he plays it out in like an alternate universe. Again, Lord of the Flies is a great novel, but Divine Invasion, I remember sitting through that and being wowed at some parts with what he did with the novel. So, sorry Golding, you're a great writer. Love Lord of the Flies, but Divine Invasion is going to take that one. All right, we're on to the semifinals now. So this should go fairly quickly. So we've got Stevenson here versus Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Now, this should go quickly because I've already talked about all these books. Nothing new. So yeah, this one, I like Philip Dick, but I really liked Stevenson. So there you go. Freud versus Melville. Again, it's this nonfiction versus fiction. It's an uphill battle. Moby Dick was an epic book. So Melville's going to take that one. Now, Shakespeare's Measure for Measure versus Romeo and Juliet. I mean, if you check out my Goodreads, one of these has a 3 out of 4 and one of them has a 4 out of 4. So Measure for Measure was my favorite Shakespeare of the year. Now we're on to Kafka versus Dick's Divine Invasion. Ooh, that is a tough one. Oh, man. I don't know if I can make that decision right now. They're very different. It's like apples trying to compare apples and oranges. Jeez. You're gonna have to skip ahead in this video. You're gonna have to just scroll or use your little arrow key. 5 seconds. Skip ahead. Because I really don't know. I think it's funny that I'm getting caught up on this because I don't think either of these books are gonna win in the long run. But so I guess I'll just pick one. But sheesh, this is a tough one. I think I might give it to Kafka, honestly, because the Divine Invasion. Oh, but is it though? I was gonna say that Divine Invasion wasn't my favorite Philip Dick of the year, but I think it might have been. Ooh. Dang, I don't know. I'm just gonna pick one. Sorry guys, I don't really know what to say about that. Okay, so Stevenson versus Melville. This is the comparison that I was hoping. I knew it would happen, but I wasn't sure when, because this is a tough one. I really like both these books, and it's hard to compare them because Stevenson, that's like a 2-hour, 3-hour read tops, and Melville, if you take it slow, oh man, that could take you, I don't know, 20, 30 hours. It's like 10 times as long. So this is really hard to compare. Jeez. Remember, we're taking this in terms of enjoyability. Now, Moby Dick had some epic moments. Really good. But not every part was a page-turner. Some parts were a slog. Right? When he's describing all the whale anatomy. But Stevenson, back-to-back, even though it was short, it was awesome. So, this is... I'm sorry, Melville. I like you. I'll always remember you. But you gotta go. Alright, now Kafka. I did not expect Kafka to make it this far. But hey, that's the luck of the draw. So Measure for Measure, this is not too difficult of a choice. I really like Measure for Measure. So in the finals here, we have Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde versus Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. Now, again, Shakespeare, you get a lot out of him when you read him. But in terms of enjoyability, sometimes you get stuck. Sometimes the verbiage is inaccessible. You gotta look in the footnotes, and maybe you still don't get it. You gotta read it a few times, and then you get it. Shakespeare is awesome. I will continue to read him. But again, Stevenson really just drew me in with that gothic aesthetic. The plot was original, and I think that Stevenson said a lot about the duality of man and the nature of sin in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So not only was there some sort of aesthetic enjoyment in terms of gloomy Gothic Victorian England, there also was some theological meat and potatoes in there as well. And for that reason, I think by a slim margin, I'm giving my best book of the year to Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So yeah, that's my 2023 book wrap up. So yeah, didn't really get to too many that's this year. Lucky for you, or else this video would be longer. But yeah, hoping to do better next year. If you agree or disagree with any of the matches that occurred throughout the course of this video, let me know in the comments, Write a hate comment. Tell me, send me death threats. I like getting death threats. Makes me feel alive, So yeah, see you next time.